Part 1. The unexpected encounter. Marcus Thompson's hands shook as he loosened his silk tie, the weight of failure pressing down on his broad shoulders like a heavy stone. The board meeting had been a disaster. 3 major investors had pulled out. His company's stock had dropped 15% in one day, and the media was calling him the fallen king of tech. His Armani suit felt like a prison as he walked through the empty parking garage beneath his downtown office building, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the cold concrete with each hurried step. The fluorescent lights above flickered and hummed, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts of his former success. Marcus pulled out his phone and immediately dialed his lawyer, his voice echoing in the vast space as he spoke in angry, clipped sentences about damage control and emergency meetings. He didn't notice the small figure watching him from behind a concrete pillar, or the way his voice carried through the garage like thunder in a cave. As he approached his black BMW sedan, worth more than most people's homes, Marcus was already planning his next call to the crisis management team when something caught his eye. The back door of his car was slightly open, which was impossible since he always kept it locked, and there was definitely someone inside. His first thought was carjacking, his second was kidnapping, and his third was that this day couldn't possibly get any worse. Marcus's heart began to race as he slowly approached the vehicle, his phone still pressed to his ear, while he whispered to his lawyer about calling security. But as he got closer, he realized the figure in his back seat was far too small to be a threat. It was a child, a little girl, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, sitting perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a school bus. She wore a faded pink dress that had seen better days. Her hair was neatly braided, despite its obvious need for washing, and her dark eyes held a seriousness that seemed far too mature for someone so young. Marcus stopped talking mid-sentence, leaving his lawyer's voice buzzing uselessly from the phone's speaker as he stared at this impossible scene. The little girl looked directly at him through the window, and instead of fear or surprise, her expression showed determination, mixed with something that looked almost like disappointment. Marcus slowly opened the driver's door, his mind racing with questions about how she had gotten past building security, why she had chosen his car, and whether this was some elaborate scheme by his competitors to destroy what remained of his reputation. But before he could speak, before he could demand answers or threaten to call the police, the child turned to face him fully and spoke in a voice that was quiet but firm, each word carefully chosen like she had practiced this moment. In her mind, "Sir, you need to stop talking so loud," she said, her small hands gesturing toward the far corner of the parking garage where Marcus now noticed a figure slumped against the wall. "My mama is finally sleeping, and she hasn't slept properly in 3 days because people keep making noise and telling us to move along." Marcus followed her gaze and felt his breath catch in his throat as he saw a woman in her 30s, thin and exhausted, curled up on a piece of cardboard with a worn blanket pulled around her shoulders. The woman's face was peaceful in sleep, but even from a distance, Marcus could see the dark circles under her eyes, and the way her body seemed to fold in on itself, like she was trying to disappear. The little girl continued speaking, her voice never rising above a whisper, but somehow carrying more authority than any board member Marcus had ever faced. "I heard you talking on your phone about problems with money and people being mad at you. But my mama says we shouldn't complain about our troubles too loud, because there's always someone who has it worse." Marcus felt his phone slip from his numb fingers, clattering to the concrete floor as the child's words hit him like physical blows. Here he was, worth millions even after today's losses, wearing clothes that cost more than some people made in a month, driving a car that could house a family, and he had been shouting about his problems while the mother and daughter were sleeping on the cold ground just 50 feet away. The little girl shifted in the back seat, and Marcus noticed she had a small backpack clutched tightly against her chest, probably containing everything she owned in the world. "I'm sorry for getting in your car without asking," she continued, her politeness making Marcus's heart ache in ways he didn't understand. "But I saw your picture on that poster over there, and you looked like maybe you might be different from the other people who tell us to go away." Marcus turned to see his own face, smiling back at him from a company advertisement on the garage wall. A promotional photo from Happier Times that showed him cutting a ribbon at a charity event, surrounded by children from a local school. The irony was so sharp it felt like a knife in his chest. There he was, supposedly caring about children, while a real child sat in his car asking him to simply be quiet so her mother could rest. The parking garage suddenly felt like a cathedral, holy and hushed, and Marcus realized that everything he thought he knew about success about problems, about what really mattered in life, was about to change forever. Part 2. The heartbreaking truth. Marcus slowly sank into the driver's seat of his expensive car, his mind struggling to process what was happening as the little girl in his back seat adjusted her position and began to speak in that same careful, measured way that made her seem far older than her years. "My name is Amara," she said softly, glancing toward her sleeping mother with protective eyes that held too much worry for someone so young. "That's my mama, Jasmine, and she's the strongest person in the whole world. But even strong people get tired sometimes." Marcus found himself leaning forward, drawn into her story despite the chaos of his own crumbling business empire. And as Amara continued talking, each word she spoke seemed to crack open his heart a little more. She explained how they had been living in this parking garage for 3 weeks now, ever since they lost their apartment when the rent went up and her mother's hours got cut at 2 of her 3 jobs. Mama works at the hospital cleaning rooms during the day. Then she goes to the diner on 5th Street at night. And on weekends, she takes care of Mrs. Henderson's garden because Mrs. Henderson is too old to do it herself. Amara said, counting on her small fingers as if keeping track of her mother's schedule was something she had memorized perfectly. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he realized this child knew more about hard work and responsibility than most adults he dealt with in his corporate world. Amara's voice dropped even lower as she continued, "We used to have a nice place with my little brother Danny, but then he got really sick and had to go to the hospital for a long time. And the doctors said it would cost a lot of money to make him better." The little girl's composure wavered slightly as she mentioned her brother, and Marcus could see tears forming in her dark eyes, even though she was clearly trying to be brave. "Mama said we had to choose between keeping our home and keeping Danny alive, and that wasn't really a choice at all. So we gave all our money to the hospital, and now Danny is getting better, but we don't have anywhere to live." Marcus felt like someone had punched him in the stomach as the full weight of their situation became clear. This family had sacrificed everything for a sick child, and now they were paying the price by sleeping in parking garages and hoping strangers wouldn't chase them away. Amara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and continued her story, explaining how they moved from place to place each night, always looking for somewhere safe and warm where her mother could rest for a few hours before starting the cycle all over again. "The security guards usually find us and make us leave, but I noticed that this garage doesn't have cameras in this corner, and I thought maybe if we were really quiet and didn't bother anybody, we could stay here for a little while." The innocent hope in her voice made Marcus want to cry, but Amara wasn't finished with her heartbreaking tale. She told him about how her mother hadn't eaten a full meal in days because she always gave most of their food to her children. How Jasmine would pretend she wasn't hungry so that Amara and Danny could have enough to eat when they visited him at the hospital. "I try to help by finding bottles and cans to sell, and sometimes people give me money when I'm walking around. But Mama says I'm not supposed to ask strangers for things because it's not safe." Marcus realized that this 7-year-old child was essentially trying to be a breadwinner for her family, scavenging for recycling and accepting charity from passersby, while her mother worked herself to exhaustion. Amara's next words hit him like a physical blow. "I saw your picture on that poster and read the words underneath that said your company helps families in need. So I thought maybe you were the kind of person who might understand that we're not bad people. We're just going through a hard time." Marcus followed her gaze to the company advertisement again, remembering the photo shoot where he had posed with underprivileged children for a publicity campaign about corporate responsibility, and the shame that washed over him was so intense he had to grip the steering wheel to steady himself. Here was a real child in real need, sitting in his car and asking for nothing more than the basic human dignity of being allowed to exist without harassment. While he had spent millions on marketing campaigns designed to make him look caring and generous, Amara's voice grew even softer as she continued. "Mama doesn't know I got in your car because she's been sleeping since yesterday afternoon. And I didn't want to wake her up because this is the first time she's slept without crying in a really long time." The image of this exhausted mother crying herself to sleep while her young daughter watched over her was almost more than Marcus could bear. And he found himself wondering how many other families were struggling in silence while he lived in his ivory tower, completely oblivious to their suffering. "I know you're probably going to call the police or security now," Amara said with resignation far beyond her years. "But I just wanted you to know that we're not trying to hurt anybody or steal anything. We're just trying to survive until things get better." As she finished speaking, Amara looked directly into Marcus's eyes, with a mixture of hope and fear that made him realize this moment would define not just his day, but possibly the rest of his life. because sitting before him was everything he claimed to care about in his corporate mission statements, but had never actually encountered in person. And the choice of what to do next would reveal exactly what kind of man he really was beneath all the expensive suits and fancy titles. Part 3. A moment of truth. Marcus sat in complete silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. His expensive watch ticking loudly in the quiet garage as he stared at this remarkable little girl, who had just turned his entire world upside down with her simple, honest words. Every instinct he had developed over 20 years of corporate success told him to call security, to distance himself from this situation that could become a legal liability or public relations nightmare. But something deeper and more human was stirring inside his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a child himself, before money and power had built walls around his heart. Amara watched his face carefully, as if she could read the battle happening in his mind. And when she saw him reach for his phone, her small shoulders sagged with the weight of another disappointment from another adult who would choose convenience over compassion. But instead of dialing security, Marcus surprised himself by turning off his phone completely and setting it aside, his hands trembling slightly as he made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "Amara," he said quietly, testing her name on his tongue and finding it beautiful, "I'm not going to call anyone to make you leave. But I think we need to wake your mother up because she needs to know that there are people who want to help your family." The little girl's eyes widened with shock and something that might have been hope. But she shook her head firmly and said, "She won't want charity, sir, because Mama has her pride. And she says taking handouts makes people think less of you, even when you're desperate." Marcus felt another piece of his heart crack as he realized that even in their darkest hour, this family was clinging to their dignity with a strength that put his own character to shame. He got out of his car slowly, his legs feeling unsteady as he walked toward the corner where Jasmine slept. And as he got closer, he could see that she was even younger than he had first thought. Probably in her late 20s, with calloused hands that spoke of hard physical labor and worry lines around her eyes that told the story of sleepless nights spent figuring out how to survive another day. Amara followed him quietly, her small hand reaching out to gently touch her mother's shoulder with the tender care of someone who had learned to be gentle with fragile things. "Mama," she whispered softly, "there's someone here who wants to talk to us, and I think he might be different from the others." Jasmine's eyes opened slowly, and Marcus could see the exact moment when she realized where she was and what was happening. Her face cycling through confusion, fear, and then a fierce protective instinct as she quickly sat up and pulled her daughter close to her side. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but filled with dignity. "We'll leave right now. We didn't mean to cause any trouble. We were just trying to rest for a few hours." Marcus knelt down so he would be at her eye level, a gesture that surprised him because he couldn't remember the last time he had knelt for anyone. And he spoke in the gentlest voice he could manage. "You don't need to apologize for existing, and you don't need to leave. But I would like to know your story if you're willing to share it with me." Jasmine looked at him suspiciously, her arms still wrapped protectively around Amara, and Marcus could see the intelligence in her tired eyes as she tried to figure out what kind of person he was and what he might want from them. Slowly, carefully, she began to tell him about her life, how she had been a registered nurse before the hospital budget cuts eliminated her position, how she had tried to find another nursing job, but discovered that being homeless made employers reluctant to hire her, how she had taken whatever work she could find to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, until medical bills for her son's leukemia treatment had consumed every penny they had saved and more. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her chin lifting with pride even as tears started to fall down her cheeks. "You're wondering how a nurse could end up sleeping in a parking garage. But the truth is that one catastrophic illness can destroy any family, no matter how hard they work or how responsible they are." Marcus found himself nodding because he was beginning to understand that the distance between success and disaster was much smaller than he had ever imagined, and that the safety net he had always assumed existed for hard-working people was actually full of holes big enough for entire families to fall through. As Jasmine continued her story, Marcus learned that she had actually been employed by his own company's cleaning service until budget cuts had eliminated her position 3 months ago, a decision that he had probably approved without ever thinking about the real people whose lives would be affected. The irony hit him like a physical blow. He had been part of the system that had contributed to their homelessness, and now here they were, asking for nothing more than the right to exist peacefully in the shadows of his success. "What can I do?" he asked, the words coming out before he could stop them. And both Jasmine and Amara looked at him with such surprise that he realized how rare it must be for anyone to offer help without expecting something in return. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes studying his face as if trying to determine whether his offer was genuine. And when she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who had learned to be cautious about hope. "I don't want charity," she said firmly. "But if you know of any nursing positions, or if you could just let us stay here for one more night, so I can rest enough to think clearly about what to do next, that would mean more to us than you could ever know." Marcus felt tears stinging his own eyes as he realized that this woman, who had every reason to be bitter and angry at the world, was still asking for nothing more than a fair chance and a safe place to rest. And in that moment, he knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Part 4. The transformation begins. Marcus stood up slowly, his mind racing with possibilities as he looked down at Jasmine and Amara. And without saying another word, he walked back to his car and retrieved his wallet, pulling out a business card that suddenly felt heavier than gold in his trembling fingers. "I want you to come with me right now," he said, his voice stronger than he felt inside. "Not because I'm offering charity, but because I think I might have a solution that could help us both." Jasmine's eyes narrowed with suspicion as she studied his face, clearly wondering what catch might be hidden behind his offer, while Amara looked back and forth between the two adults with the wisdom of someone who had learned to read the subtle signs of hope and disappointment in grown-up conversations. Marcus knelt down again and handed his business card to Jasmine, watching as her eyes widened when she realized exactly who he was. And he could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed the fact that the CEO of the company that had indirectly contributed to her homelessness was now standing in front of her offering help. "There's a hotel 3 blocks from here," Marcus continued, his words coming faster now as the plan formed in his mind. "And I want to get you and Amara a room for tonight so you can both rest properly while I make some phone calls and figure out how to fix this situation." Jasmine shook her head immediately, her pride flaring up like a protective shield. But before she could refuse, Marcus held up his hand and said something that surprised even himself. "I'm not doing this to make myself feel better about being rich. And I'm not doing it because I think you can't take care of yourself. I'm doing it because 3 months ago, I signed a paper that eliminated your job without ever thinking about the human cost. And now I have a chance to make that right." The honesty in his voice seemed to reach something deep inside Jasmine's defenses, and Marcus could see her internal struggle as she weighed her desperate need for help against her fierce determination to maintain her dignity in a world that had stripped away almost everything else. Amara tugged gently on her mother's sleeve and whispered something that Marcus couldn't hear. But whatever the little girl said seemed to tip the balance, because Jasmine nodded slowly and said, "1 night, and then we'll figure out what comes next." Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with determination as he helped them gather their few belongings. And as they walked toward his car, he found himself seeing the parking garage through their eyes, noticing the cold concrete walls and harsh, fluorescent lights that had been their bedroom for weeks. The drive to the hotel was quiet, except for Amara's occasional questions about the buttons and gadgets in his expensive car. And Marcus found himself explaining how the heated seats worked, while thinking about how long it had been since he had talked to a child about anything other than business photo opportunities. At the hotel, Marcus watched Jasmine's face carefully as they entered the warm, well-lit lobby, and he could see her trying to hide her amazement at the clean carpets and comfortable furniture that most people took for granted but which must have seemed like luxury after sleeping on cardboard. The desk clerk looked questioningly at this unlikely group, a man in an expensive suit, accompanied by a tired woman and a small child carrying a worn backpack. But Marcus's credit card and confident manner quickly smoothed over any hesitation. As they rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, Marcus found himself studying Jasmine's reflection in the polished metal doors, and he was struck by how beautiful she was beneath the exhaustion and worry, how her eyes held intelligence and strength that no amount of hardship had been able to diminish. When they reached the room, Amara immediately ran to the bed and bounced on it gently, her face lighting up with pure joy at the feeling of clean sheets and soft pillows, while Jasmine stood in the doorway, looking overwhelmed by the simple miracle of a private bathroom and a door that locked from the inside. Marcus handed Jasmine the extra key card and said, "Order whatever you want from room service. Take hot showers, sleep as long as you need to, and don't worry about checking out, because I've paid for a week." But instead of looking grateful, Jasmine's expression hardened and she said, "I told you I don't want charity, And buying us a hotel room for a week is exactly that, no matter how you try to dress it up. Marcus felt his carefully constructed plan starting to crumble until Amara, who had been listening to their conversation while pretending to explore the room, walked over and took his hand in her small one. "Mr. Marcus," she said seriously, "Mama's scared because when people help us, they usually want something back that we can't give. But I think you're different because you look sad in the same way she does, like you've lost something important and don't know how to find it again." The simple wisdom of her words hit Marcus like a lightning bolt, and he realized that this 7-year-old had seen right through his successful exterior to the emptiness he had been carrying around for years, without even acknowledging it existed. He looked at Jasmine and said, "Your daughter is right. I am lost. And maybe helping your family is really just me trying to find my way back to being the kind of person I thought I was before. I got so caught up in making money that I forgot what money was supposed to be for." Something shifted in Jasmine's expression, a slight softening around her eyes that suggested she might be beginning to trust him, and she said quietly, "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus took a deep breath and said, "Tomorrow morning, I want you to come to my office for a real job interview for a position in our employee health and wellness department. A job that would use your nursing skills and pay you what you're actually worth, not as a favor, but because you're qualified, and because my company needs someone who understands what it means to struggle." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Amara turning on the television and finding a cartoon channel. And Marcus could see Jasmine processing his offer, weighing the possibility that this might actually be the break her family desperately needed against the fear that it was too good to be true. Part 5. A life forever changed 6 months later. Marcus Thompson stood in his corner office, looking out at the city skyline. But instead of seeing buildings and profit margins, he now saw families and stories and real people living real lives. Behind every window, a perspective that had completely transformed not just how he ran his business, but who he was as a human being. The company's quarterly reports lay open on his mahogany desk, showing record profits that would have once been his only measure of success. But today his attention was focused on a different kind of report, one that detailed how many employees had used the new emergency assistance fund, how many families had been helped by the expanded healthcare benefits, and how many people had found stability through the living wage policy that Jasmine had helped him design. A gentle knock on his door interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see Jasmine herself entering with a warm smile, her professional clothing and confidence bearing a stark contrast to the exhausted woman he had met sleeping in a parking garage half a year ago. "The wellness center is officially opening next week," she reported, settling into the chair across from his desk with the easy comfort of someone who had earned her place through hard work and dedication rather than sympathy. "We've already had 50 employees sign up for the mental health counseling services, and the on-site medical clinic has prevented 3 potential emergency room visits just this month." Marcus nodded with pride, remembering how nervous Jasmine had been during that first job interview, how she had sat on the edge of her chair, answering every question with the desperate precision of someone who knew this might be her family's last chance at stability. The position of Director of Employee Wellness had been created specifically for her, but she had more than proven that his faith in her abilities was justified, bringing a combination of medical expertise and genuine empathy that had revolutionized how the company treated its workforce. The sound of children's laughter from the hallway made them both smile, and Marcus wasn't surprised when Amara appeared in the doorway, her school backpack slung over her shoulder and her face bright with the confidence of a child who no longer worried about where she would sleep at night. "Mr. Marcus," said she called out happily, running over to give him the hug that had become their daily ritual whenever she stopped by the office after school. "Look what I drew in art class today." She pulled out a colorful picture, showing a tall building with lots of windows and stick figures of people holding hands in front of it, with the words "Thank you for listening" written in careful 7-year-old handwriting across the bottom. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that he had learned to recognize as genuine emotion, something that had been buried so deep under years of corporate coldness that he had forgotten it existed until Amara had dug it out with her innocent wisdom and honest heart. "This is beautiful," he said, studying the drawing carefully. "But you know you don't need to thank me anymore, right? Everything good that happened came from your family's strength, not from anything I did." Amara shook her head seriously, the same expression she had worn that first night in the parking garage when she had been protecting her sleeping mother. "Mama says that helping people isn't about being the hero. It's about being the bridge that helps them cross over to something better. And that's what you were for us." The simple profundity of her words never ceased to amaze Marcus. and he carefully pinned her drawing next to all the others that decorated his office wall, creating a colorful gallery that told the story of a transformation that had changed multiple lives. Jasmine watched this interaction with tears in her eyes, remembering the desperate woman who had been willing to accept any help just to keep her children safe, and marveling at how far they had all come from that dark night when hope had seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford. Danny's doctors say he's been cancer-free for 4 months now, she said softly, and his latest blood work shows he's responding even better than they expected to the new treatment protocol. Marcus felt a surge of joy mixed with relief, knowing that the comprehensive health insurance package he had fought the board to approve had made the difference between experimental treatments that offered hope and outdated protocols that simply managed decline. The door opened again, and a familiar voice called out, "Is this where the family meeting is happening?" As Danny himself appeared, thin but smiling, his bald head covered by a colorful knit cap that one of the office volunteers had made for him. At 9 years old, he had survived more than most adults ever would, but his spirit remained unbroken, and his presence filled the room with the kind of light that reminded everyone why the struggle had been worth it. Marcus knelt down to Danny's level, a gesture that had become natural to him over the months of visiting the boy in the hospital and watching him fight his way back to health with a courage that put corporate battles into proper perspective. "How are you feeling today, champion?" he asked, using the nickname that had stuck after Danny had beaten his first round of chemotherapy. "Really good," Danny replied with the honesty that children possess. "And Mama says that when I'm all better, I want to work here too, so I can help other kids whose families are scared like we were." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them, and Marcus realized that this child, who had every reason to be bitter about the unfairness of life, was already planning to spend his future helping others, a generosity of spirit that shamed every successful adult who hoarded their blessings instead of sharing them. As the afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, casting golden light over this unlikely family that had formed through crisis and grown through compassion, Marcus reflected on how a chance encounter in a parking garage had taught him that true success wasn't measured in stock prices or profit margins, but in the number of lives you touched and the legacy of kindness you left behind. His phone buzzed with urgent messages from investors and board members, the same kind of calls that had once consumed his every waking moment. But now, he simply turned it off and focused on what really mattered: the laughter of children who had a safe place to sleep, the pride of a mother who had rebuilt her life through determination and opportunity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his wealth finally had a purpose beyond accumulating more wealth. The company was thriving in ways that couldn't be measured by quarterly reports, creating a culture where employees felt valued and supported, where families facing crisis could find help instead of judgment, and where success was defined by lifting others up rather than climbing over them. As Amara chattered about her plans to become a doctor, like the ones who had saved her brother, and Danny talked about his dreams of building houses for homeless families, and Jasmine shared updates about the new programs that were helping dozens of employees navigate their own challenges, Marcus realized that the most important business lesson he had ever learned hadn't come from Harvard or Wall Street, but from a 7-year-old girl who had taught him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply listen when someone asks you to be quiet.